Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Mishmer. Beautiful night outside, and great to see everyone. Great to hear the sounds of learning. So, if I would ask a question, there's one question I could ask that I'd probably get 4 different answers, and none of them are completely accurate. How many years were the Jewish people enslaved in Egypt?
Almost 400.
400?
Almost.
427.
Grayson?
86.
86.
Close.
210.
108.
Okay, so, like you said, it could get many different answers and none of them are exact. So when we read the psukim, we read the verses in the Torah, we could actually get a whole bunch of different ideas, and we try to figure out how everything makes sense. One of the beautiful things of learning Torah is you could see things that seem to be a contradiction, seem to be a stira, but in fact they could all somehow make sense. So the pasuk in this week's parsha tells us. Let me find the pasuk. It might take me a few seconds, but Umosha b'nei Yisrael asher yoshu b'Mitzrayim 30 shana v'arba ma'os shana. The pasuk says that the Jewish people sat in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, 430 years. You're very close, Grayson. Vayehi miket 30 shana v'arba ma'os shana. Vayehi be'etzem hayom hazeh yotzu kol tzivas Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim. It says after 430 years, on this day, the Jewish people left Egypt. Now, Rashi goes in here in great length and says that 430 years it can't be there in Egypt for 430 years, because if we count the generations that came down to Egypt, so we know Kahas, who was Moshe's grandfather, he actually came down to Egypt with the tribes when Yosef brought his brothers down. So Kahas, I believe lived around 180 something years. His son Amram, who was Moshe's father, lived 130 years. And then Moshe himself, when the Torah tells us specifically that when they left Egypt, Moshe was 80 years old. So if we add all those together, you're going to get to 350. Says Rashi, that 350 is if we would count each person's years separately. Now, many of the years were overlapping because you have a father and a son. The son isn't born when the father is one. And Kahas, Moshe's grandfather, didn't go into Egypt when he was 1 year old either. So there had to be definitely some years of overlap. And actually the calculation that Rashi says is that in fact they were in Egypt for 410 years. That's the amount they were actually in Egypt. And it's also hinted in the pasuk when Yaakov tells his children to go down to Egypt. It says Redu is 210 years. Sorry, yes. So in fact, they were present in Egypt for 410 years. Now, if 210 years, okay, yeah, 210 years they were in Egypt, and that is the amount of Redu. This is also referenced in the Haggadah. In the Pesach Haggadah, we say Baruch Shomer Havtachatz LeYisrael Baruch Hu Shakadosh Baruch Hu Chishev Esaketz. We say we bless Hashem. Blessed is God who kept His promise. So, because think you don't, when someone keeps their promise, you usually don't bless them, don't give them a bracha. You know, it would be the contrary. Someone who breaks their promise is not considered very reliable. But so we say we bless Hashem for keeping His promise. So what does it mean? We say Hakadosh Baruch Hu Chishev Esaketz. He calculated the end of the redemption. If we look at the word kates, the numerical value of the word kates is 190. So 190 is the exact difference between the number 210, which is the years that they were physically in Egypt, and the number 400, which is what was promised to Avram at the Bris Ben Abasarim, that his descendants will be enslaved for 400 years. But the question is, everything at the end of the day, things have to make sense. So how is it if HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avram that his children will be enslaved for 400 years? The 430, Rashi says, is 430 from when Hashem actually promised it to Avram. 30 years later, Yitzchak was born, and then the clock started with the 400 years, and they were actually in Egypt for 210. And even out of those 210, you need to realize that as long as any of the any of the Shvatim were alive, the actual working didn't start. So the period of time where they actually worked, the Jews actually worked in Egypt, was around 86 years. So we have all these numbers, and because Baruch Hu promised Avram they're going to go out for 400 years. How did that 400 turn into 210 and then into 86? So actually, this is also mentioned in the Gemara we learned this week in Megillah. The Gemara says there was a time when Talmai, the king of Egypt, wanted to translate the Torah into Greek. He was the Egyptian king of Yavan. He was the Egyptian Greeks at the time, so he wanted to have the Torah translated into Greek, and he wanted to make sure it's completely accurate. So he said, if I'm going to go to the rabbis and tell them all together to translate the Torah, they might play around with it. So he took 70 Chachamim, 70 sages, put each one in a separate room. That way, he said, they're obviously not going to play around. Each one is going to try to just give the accurate translation, because they might be get busted if they change anything around. And the Gemara says that all 70 of them had this just the wisdom to slightly change certain things that might bring up questions by Talmai, and one of them is this pasuk. So they added on, instead of saying that Jewish people were in Egypt for 400 years or 430 years, they said they were in Egypt and in other lands for 430 years. So, but how can we actually understand that? How do the two ideas make sense if it says they were there for 430 years, and we know they weren't physically in Egypt for 430 years? So how could this make sense? So the Maharal explains a very fascinating idea, and then there's another, I'd like to elaborate on that also. Maharal says that once Avram was promised that his children would be enslaved, from then on they were in the mindset of being enslaved. So if we could take an example, a person goes to the doctor says you're gonna have to have surgery on a certain day, and it could be a complicated surgery. So that whole time that going towards the surgery, the individual so stressed, so worried, that whole being in that mindset, you're in a mindset of slavery, even though you're not physically in slavery. The fact that you know it's coming, you know there's this godly promise that this is going to come, that is what made them. That is sort of counted and considered to be as part of the slavery. And it's actually, if we look at the psukim, it actually fits in, because it says, the first pasuk says, "Umosha b'nei Yisrael asher yashuv b'Mitzrayim." B'nei Yisrael were in Egypt 430 years. Then it says, "Vayhi mikei shloshim shana v'arba'amot shana, vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh yatzu kol tzivos Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim." After 430 years, they left the land of Egypt. The first pasuk said they left Mitzrayim. Second pasuk says Eretz Mitzrayim. So what is the difference? That makes sense according to this idea that true, for 400 years they were in Mitzrayim. They were in the mindset of slavery. They had the fear of being enslaved, but they left Eretz Mitzrayim. They left the actual physical slavery after 430 years. But all this leads to try to get an explanation of what actually did the trick. How were they actually able to get out of 400 years, even though Avram was promised 400 years of physical slavery? They actually only ended up getting way less than that. So there's a story told about the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim was once asked by a Jew who had a business, and in the evening he decided he's going to open a gemach. He's going to have after he closes his store for a few hours a day, he would sit and lend people money and do all kinds of other he was involved in all kinds of other charity and kindness, and it was taking up a lot of his time. And he told the Chafetz Chaim, maybe I'll just hire someone else to work in this chesed organization, and I'll either go rest or go learn, go do something else. I won't have to be physically involved in the chesed, because it's being it's being very stressful for me. The Chafetz Chaim said there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, "Ach toiv v'chesed yirdefuni." Let good and kindness run after me. So it says it's quite a strange term to use. Why should chesed run after me? Maybe chesed should reach me, should come on to me. Chesed should chase me. So he said, Chafetz Chaim said like this: every person has a certain amount of stress they need to go through in life. There's something that Kadosh Baruch Hu decided. Kadosh Baruch Hu every person has challenges they have to go through in life, and certain things that should bother you and stress you out. He says, David HaMelech is saying in Tehillim, Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, may kindness run after me. He's praying that his stress should be on good things. His stress should be to do mitzvos, to be engaged in kindness and helping others. That was his prayer. Those should be the things that take up his mind and take up his time. Said, if you're gonna, the Chavetz Chaim said, if you're gonna close down or you're gonna take someone else is gonna replace you in doing this chesed, believe me, you'll find other things to worry about. So the prayer should be, your stress, your challenge should be in doing mitzvos. So there's actually a Zohar that talks about the work that the Jewish people did in Egypt, and when it says, the Torah describes all the things they did, this is all referencing to certain hardships of Torah learning. It says that they worked b'chomer u'b'levenim. Chomer is referencing to kal v'chomer, method of applying two cases to each other in Torah learning. Levenim is libuna shel halacha, trying to get to the bottom of halacha. Kol avoda basadeh is brises that are basadeh because they're not published in the Mishnah. They're like out of it. So all the physical activity that's mentioned in the Torah, at least in the pshat level of the Torah, the Zohar says, is referencing on the hidden level to different challenges and different depths we have in Torah learning. So if we take the story from the Chavetz Chaim and try to think, how could we change if any people or all of us actually have certain gezeros, certain decrees, there were certain things we have to go through, certain challenges, certain hardships, we could actually convert the physical challenges and hardships by dedicating and devoting ourselves to Torah and having that the time we're spending and the effort and mind we give to Torah learning be in place of other physical hardships and challenges. So, and that's what the Mishnah says. One who accepts upon him the yoke of Torah, then Kadosh Baruch Hu will remove from him all other challenges, all other stress. So this is really, if we could take this idea and try to think about, if we want to sort of let off our different stress that we have in life, different things that are bothering us in life, if we take more time to dedicate ourselves to Torah learning, that will bring our gear our focus and gear our time and worry towards understanding the words of Torah, and with that Hashem will remove from us our physical and natural worries. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.